Hello, alumni and friends. We welcome you to the 30th Alumni Festival, and specifically to A Room to Live In, inside Kettle's Yard, presented by Cambridge in America and Kettle's Yard. On behalf of Collegiate Cambridge, I hope you are all safe and well in these unusual times. We are glad you are joining us today. There is no question that we will all enjoy the coming hour with Andrew Naren, who has served as the director of Kettle's Yard since 2011, viewing and learning about a number of the unique arrangements of art and objects which make Kettle's Yard so special. A few words about Andrew before we begin. Before joining Kettle's Yard, he was a director of Dundee Contemporary Arts and Modern Art Oxford, working with numerous UK and international artists. In the 1980s and 1990s, as a curator in Glasgow, he organized pioneering exhibitions with artists from Eastern Europe and supported the rise of a new generation of British artists. Andrew led the acclaimed £11 million redevelopment of Kettle's Yard, which reopened in February of 2018 with new galleries and education spaces. Andrew was appointed Officer of the British Order of the British Empire in 2019 New Year's Honors for services to museums and arts. We are thrilled to have him with us. Please welcome Andrew Naren.
Hello, I hope you can all hear me. These wonderful online events, it's just extraordinary, the global nature of them, which wouldn't be quite so possible if we were all trying to get ourselves to Cambridge. Right, I don't have very long. Thank you for the introductions. Wonderful to be here. You're looking, I hope, at an image of Kettle's Yard. Now, some of you may have been and seen Kettle's Yard when you were students at the university. I hope you did. If you were a student since 1957, you would have had a chance to go into these beautiful cottages in this extraordinary place created by a remarkable man called Jim Eade. But I am going to give you a little bit of an introduction to remind you of who Jim Eade was, what Kettle's Yard is, and sort of where we are now. And then we're going to have a whistle-stop tour through the building, particularly the house, because Kettle's Yard is a house and a gallery, but this is really a talk about the heart of Kettle's Yard, the Kettle's Yard house. So we're looking at what were three, in fact, four slum cottages in the late 50s or the mid 50s in Cambridge. The fourth of the cottages was to the right, where you can see the sort of arched, you can see a round window. And Jim Eade was in his 60s with his wife Helen when they came to Cambridge. They'd already had an extraordinary life. And in fact, someone called Laura Freeman is writing a biography of Jim Eade, which we're all excited about. And I was talking to her yesterday, and we were saying, well, he's not really, he's not really a sort of single. It's not like he did one thing and too dull to write a biography about. It's very difficult to keep up with Jim. He did so many things. Very briefly, he was born near Cardiff, on the edge of Cardiff, in 1895. Rather sort of ordinary background. His father was a solicitor. He was very sensitive and very sort of aesthetically aware from a very early age, almost sort of hilarious. Interested in rooms, interested in space. A wonderful story about how the parents of a schoolboy friend of his went out for a few hours, and Jim decides to rearrange the furniture. And I think in a way he spent the rest of his life rearranging furniture, trying to make us be aware of the spaces we live in, to understand what it's like to be in a particular space and how that can make you sort of feel better and more thoughtful about the world and about the objects that surround us and what they say about us and what they say about what you can do in the world. He then does participate in the First World War, and it's interesting, some of the artists he then worked with were pacifists, but Jim couldn't see a reason to be a pacifist. But of course, it's an extraordinary and horrific experience, and he ends up in the trenches in France in early 1916. He didn't, fortunately, in a way, he was essentially wounded, or he came out suffering from gastritis. There's an extraordinary line, actually. Let me just try and find it. Yes, he could hardly walk, suffering from gastritis, jaundice, and a nervous breakdown. In a sense, what would be called combat stress reaction. So he leaves the trenches in about March 1916, and in a sense, fortunately, never goes back. But I think this experience of people being blown to bits beside him, and this sort of horror that none of us can imagine, really influenced him. And in many ways, Kettle's Yard is a response to this experience of the First World War. People tend to think the quick version of Kettle's Yard is, oh yes, Jim Eade, for some reason he brought his collection to Cambridge, but of course he was a curator at the Tate Gallery in the 30s. He knew everybody, and that's the story. That's all you really need to know. But actually, this experience of the First World War was very important. He'd met his extraordinary wife, remarkable woman Helen, before the First World War, and they married at Chelsea Town Hall in 1921. They then had two daughters. Elizabeth and Mary. Mary is still alive, aged 95, in Somerset. Wonderful person. Again, I've met her quite a few times, and we talk about Jim and Helen, her parents. And he then joins the Tate, a very lowly position in 1921, really sort of helping with sort of photography. He then becomes effectively, as Nicholas Sirota, former director of the Tate, said, the first modern art curator at the Tate. And having been obsessed by Renaissance art, which he never lost, Jim Ede was always very keen on early Renaissance art, he then gets to know Ben Nicholson, Henry Moore, and he travels to Paris and meets Picasso, Brancusi, Miro. And some of these extraordinary great 20th century art names end up in the Kettle's Yard house when it opens in 1957. But in 1936, he leaves the Tate. The Tate is very conservative at this point, hasn't bought Picasso, doesn't really share Jim Eade's enthusiasms for the, if you like, the British avant-garde. And Jim, perhaps rather surprisingly, with Helen, moves to Tangier in Morocco. And actually, if you look on our website, I hope you might enjoy this. I've just done a series of sort of episodes called Tangier Days, which is about Jim and Helen's sort of time in Tangier for nearly 20 years. They had a break in the war when they were in America, and Jim was giving lectures all across America about art and about the nature of abstract art and where art was going, and also met remarkable artists, including Richard Poussin d'Art in New York in November 1940. We did a big show about Richard Poussin d'Art, one of the abstract expressionists you may not have heard of. It wasn't just Rothko and Pollock. There were also other extraordinary artists in this amazing cauldron of New York during the Second World War, with many Jewish refugees, of course, coming across. And we did a big show about Poussin d'Art in 2018. And so Jim made amazing relationships in America, but when he wasn't in America during the war, they were living in Tangier in Morocco. Eventually they leave Morocco, they move to a farmhouse in France, and eventually to get closer to their children, in about 1954, they leave France and they come back finally, nearly 20 years away, they come back to England, and Jim has been given remarkable works of art in the 20s and 30s by Ben Nicholson, Barbara Hepworth and others. He's also bought a few things, and he decides to try and, actually he wants a grand house, he wants a huge mansion. He doesn't get that, he gets 4 slum cottages. Let's move to the next slide. I'm hoping Elizabeth's going to do that, yes. So I want to move there because I always get nervous with speakers when they stick on one slide and you know perfectly well they've got hundreds. We've got to keep moving. But just to say a little bit more, so 1950s, he decides to open it. He has his 4 cottages, he quickly converts them, and in December 1957, Kettle's Yard opens. We're going to have a wander around in a minute, an extraordinary arrangement of art and objects. There's no labels, you can sit anywhere. It's really a sort of philosophical proposition, as you'll hear. But Kettle's Yard today, a little bit about today. So as Elizabeth kindly said, in 2018, we reopened after a very big, exhausting, in the end, 14-year project, raising £11 million. And maybe some of you contributed. If not, please help us now because we need it. I might come back to that. But you're looking at the Castle Street side down towards Magdalen College, and all of the block you can see on the right is Kettle's Yard now. So the new bit, if you like, is the furthest bit away from where you're looking. And we also rebuilt the big gallery, which you can see the sort of modern block nearest to the photographer. If we go to the next slide. We can move to the next slide. Is that possible? Yes, great. Now I'm going to keep the slides moving a bit more quickly. This always feels like the wrong slide because this is just before we reopen and you can't see a single person, and that's not what it's like. And even now, we're only open a few days a week, and there's all sorts of COVID-19 restrictions. I was there today, and there are plenty of people in our courtyard, and the cafe spills out, and the fig tree is in bloom, and it doesn't look quite so cold. But this is showing you some of Jamie Fobert, who was the architect's brilliant new entrance, using part of the small courtyard to connect the house and the galleries. This was the great project. The house was remarkable, the galleries were falling apart. We wanted people to both enjoy the permanent collection in the house, but also understand that Kettle's Yard is a living place about contemporary artists, about changing exhibitions, projects in the community, education, learning. It's alive, and Jim Eade would have, I think, valued that. And I think as part of a university since 1966, I might say more about that. So a few years after it first opened, we absolutely are committed to research, we're committed to education and learning in the broader sense. Let's move to the next slide. We're going to see inside now. So this is just to show you the 2 new galleries, which I still absolutely love. I was in this one today. This is Gallery 2. Anyone who saw our galleries before will know what a transformation this is. This is an exhibition last summer by Jennifer Lee, remarkable potter, and the plinth, which looks rather ordinary, is actually rather special, was designed by our architect, Jamie Fobard, and a sort of lifetime of her extraordinary pots was on display, not under Perspex boxes, so everybody loved it. Let's go to the next slide. And we did a big show in our opening year in 2018 with the great internationally renowned artist Anthony Gormley. Of course, he was also studied at Cambridge at Trinity College. And this is his piece, Edge, very minimal, just within Gallery 2. Some people were rather brave and actually lay down underneath this sculpture. I mean, I think it was pretty safe, but even so, it was rather daunting. We had school children all sort of lining up beside it with great photo opportunities next to Anthony's sculpture. Let's keep moving. Next slide. And that's to show you a little bit of our big gallery, Gallery 1. Next slide, with the window out to Castle Street. And here we are in the Claw Learning Studio, and at last we see some more people. And you can see there's a window in from Castle Street. So really, Kettle's Yard, from being a small, hidden place, we went from 70,000 visitors to the end of our first year after reopening, 267,000 people a year. Of course, everything is different now, and very sadly, we're only a third of our audiences are able to come. And I do hope all of this goes, like all of us do across the world, so that we can get back to welcoming more people. Let's keep moving. Next slide. And we're just seeing the same space again. Fantastic, wonderful space. This is our young people's group called Circuit. Some of them, I think we've changed a few lives just in the last few years. Next slide. I'm going to keep the slides. Elizabeth, if you're doing it, we're going to be pretty quick, so just snap ahead. So here we are. We're inside the cottages. This is the first view you see as you come in. You're welcomed in. You actually ring a sort of bell. It's not like a museum. And you come into the house and you come into Jimmy's sitting room. And immediately, I hope you can see there's a wonderful sort of aesthetic sense. The light on the left. And the thing about Jimmy, and it always sounds sort of too much at a distance, but when you go, people generally find it incredibly liberate, sort of extraordinary really, is that everything is arranged by him, but somehow it has a sort of freedom and liberation about it. It has a sense of generosity. And I think we're going to go close in on this mantelpiece, if you can see the fireplace here. And he built this fireplace, so every brick chosen by Jim, the colours thought through. Let's go a bit closer. Next slide. Yeah, here we are. So shut your eyes slightly and then open them again. I mean, I love the fact this silvered goblet on the left has a chip out of the side. Jim was really trying to say, Jimmy, this extraordinary, as I say, person with an amazing life, the Tate, America, very international, comes back. But he had learned, maybe it was his conversations with Ben Nicholson and Winifred and others, he really believed in the beauty of sort of impoverished objects, of abject objects. This goblet you can probably buy in an antique shop in Cambridge tomorrow for about £30, whatever, $25. It's got a chip in it at the back. And it's very typical of many things in Kettle's Yard that are broken, some of them are mended. He really believed in a way that beauty was not essentially about value. It was not about the perfect. And there's a sort of sense that Kettle's Yard reflects all our lives. It reflects the fact that none of us are perfect. And it sort of respects the idea that there's beauty in imperfection, and there's beauty in sort of standing proud, even when you know you can never be everything you want to be, or you can only do so much. But this arrangement here, you can see some rather extraordinary dancing shells. We're actually rather interested now in this sort of surrealist aspect of Jimmy's vision, which perhaps we hadn't spotted before, but these are two shells picked up on a beach in Morocco, and he's placed them as though they're sort of dancing. If we go to the next slide. Yes, this is, you may not have spotted, this was just at the right of the mantelpiece. This is by Christopher Wood, one of the prominent artists at Kettle's Yard, very tragically died when he was 30. And this is just sort of a boat, but it's this little rather sort of subtle artwork that you can see. I don't know whether Elizabeth, I'll try not to do this, but if you could just go back one slide, that would be hugely helpful. Yep, I just want to read you what Jimmy had said about these tiles to give you an idea that I'm not making it up when I say that he really thought about these things. Let me just find it. I constructed, this is Jimmy, I constructed the fireplace shelf with ancient tiles, which I had found in the neighborhood. Each one a surface of beauty, rose pink with its stains of worn plaster. You can see there are 3 layers of tiles. And as I said earlier, each of those bricks he would have sort of placed personally and thought through. It's almost like an abstract painting if you look at at the fireplace. And we have a Crown Derby dish, which I think he says here, I bought it in Dorset and carried it rejoicing over the downs. There's a jelly mould that you will see, sometimes has potpourri in it. And then these silver goblets, which actually immediately reflect you as a visitor. So I think my idea that really Kettle's Yard is about you. It's about you coming in. It's not really about Jim Eade. It's not about the idea of a museum as a sort of dusty set place telling you something about history. It's about the here and now. And it's about how a collection and a place can always be living. Jim Eade's great book about Kettle's Yard, which you should order from our bookshop and we'll send to you, is called A Way of Life. Written in 1984 when he was retired up in Edinburgh. But calling it a way of life was his way of saying that although this is a set arrangement of objects, actually it has a sort of living, it's living all the time. And it's our job, I think, as curators to continue to make it live. Let's keep moving. So we're still downstairs in the cottages. Let's go to the next one. Next one, please. Thank you. Great. So we're just looking to the left now as you come in, and you can see some wonderful things here. There's a pot also from Morocco. This is from Fez in Morocco, down on the ground. Nowhere else, no other Cambridge museum will you find a rather wonderful ancient pot just lying on the ground in a house. Next to it is a beautiful painting by Crystal Wood. Yes, there we are, called Flower. We'll go to that one, that's great. Yep, keep going. Yep, so that's by Crystal Wood on the left, one of my favorite works at Kettle's Yard, called Flowers. The Daffodil there's a little film of me talking about this work actually on our website, you can find it. One of the daffodils is going over. One of the daffodils is totally fresh. I love the fact that the water in this still life is murky. It's quite rare to have a still life of flowers where you sort of haven't changed the water, but it's beautifully done. And then you've got this strange, almost like sort of television thing. That isn't really a sort of television thing, I always say that. It's because him and Ben Nicholson were obsessed also with the Renaissance. And this was their sort of fresco style. They were sort of interested in the sort of the wall and the fresco. And above this painting is not a piece of modern sculpture, but the end of a broom. Some of you will know this already. So Jim was playing around again with found objects. So he's using these found objects of no value that suggest a kind of creative eye with valuable artworks, all mixed up together, but very carefully placed with light and in space. Let's keep moving. We're going to see a lot of things with light coming in. And here we are in Jim's bedroom. This is opposite his bed. And we'll go to the next, just give you a second to see that. Low table, wonderful chair. Yes. So one of the great things about Kettle's Yard, which I still love, is the way that Jim Eade and Helen leave Kettle's Yard in 1973. As I say, we became now part of the university in 66. And when they left, various pictures deliberately were just leaning against the floor, against the skirting board. And so I love this fact that professional curators just absolutely went with Jim Eade and just screwed them into the wall. Again, I do challenge you, please send me an email if you can find another sort of house, a sort of art house where there are works of art just leaning against the floor. Why did he do that? I think he did it because he wants you to be sitting down. He wants you to be pausing. You're very much, again, unlike other places, you're very much encouraged to sit down and just pause and just notice. So some of the pictures being so low works with the fact that you're sitting down. I think it's also this idea of the provisional. You should never have works on your walls. And I say this to all of you, wherever you are in the world, that you forget, that you just walk past, that you don't notice. You should sort of rehang your house, recurate it, I don't know, every year. And in a way, having some leaning against the wall allows you to rethink, to move one up. My wife, Nicola, though, would not like to hear this because too many piles of pictures never hung they do become a bit of a trip hazard, it has to be said. But anyway, here, at one at a time. So these are both by Ben Nicholson. Particularly lovely is the one above, Cornish Port of St Ives, about 1928, in this sort of slightly sort of consciously naive style, trying to get away from the sophistication of his father, William Nicholson, trying to create a new art. And of course, Ben Nicholson goes completely abstract in 1932, so a few years after this. So in a way, this is not him trying to represent the landscape. This is what's in his head, as well as looking at the landscape. It's the two together. Let's move on. So I think we're going to see the pebbles. We're going to have some pebbles now. I can't resist talking about pebbles. I think I said I was going to. So pebbles really are sort of at the heart of Kettle's Yard. In a way, they represent this idea of the found object, the essential creativity that anybody can be creative. Everybody is an artist, not just Jim Eade. Everyone can be an artist. That said, we always have to note that these pebbles are particularly spherical, and you will not just find them going to any old beach. You'll have to really search. And they're particularly, I think the secret is North Norfolk, Clyde next to the sea. And Jim used to be sent pebbles by people in envelopes and would either say, yes, that's terrific, or he would reject them. And he said famously that You only find a perfect pebble in a generation. He also said that he talked about the importance of placing two pebbles together. We think the spiral form is influenced by Richard Poussin-Dart, our American artist that I mentioned earlier. Richard Poussin-Dart, and becoming one of the abstract expressionists, used to do spirals. So we now think the spiral comes from that. And on this table, if you like, the real work of art, you know, another work of art, I shouldn't say real, should I, is a Gaudiya Bresco, one of the great stories of Kettle's yard. No time to tell you the whole story, but a remarkable French artist comes to London in 1911, very tragically dies aged 23 when he goes back to France and fights in the French army. He's French, but he becomes, in those few years in London before the First World War, an extraordinary member of the avant-garde. And this little sculpture is called Torpedo Fish and was made in 1914 and is one of the most remarkable small sculptures sort of anywhere in the world. And Gaudiya Bresco's sculptures are now in MoMA, the Pompidou Centre, they're sort of everywhere. And Jim Eade sort of discovered Gaudiya Bresco when after his death, when he was at the Tate, and then championed his work for the rest of Jimmy Eade's life, and wrote a famous book called Savage Messiah, which we still have in print, about this remarkable artist. Let's keep moving. Next slide. Just let you see that. That's a fisherman's floats at the back there. And we always have fresh flowers at Kettle's Yard, beautiful light. It was very much like this today. Okay, we're going to keep going. We need to get upstairs. Next slide. Yep, just to show you that room. Yeah, it's just to show you another pebble arrangement. Isn't that beautiful? They do have a sort of eggs-like feel, sort of eggs, not eggs, but it's just this wonderful sense of colour sort of shifting. Kettle's Yard has been very influential on people's houses, sort of independently of the art, just about how do you think about arranging objects? How do you think about spaces? Let's keep moving. Next slide. It's just showing you from above. Next slide. Ooh. Yeah, so we're upstairs now. This is a rather select view. You'll have to come some more talks. So we're now looking at one of the most remarkable artworks at Kettle's Yard in the house. This is Prometheus, 1912, by Brancusi, one of the great sculptors of the 20th century, really the most important sculptor in Paris after Rodin. Friend of Picasso. His studio is now open to the public next to the Pompidou Centre. And Jimmy bought this in 1969, just before the modern extension to Kettle's Yard. He built an extension in 1970, it opened. And he really wanted a remarkable work of art by an artist that he knew in the 20s and 30s that he could place on this Bechstein piano with this wonderful shadow. So it's the sort of pared down head of a boy, and behind it is a wonderful drawing by Brancusi as well, with a little sort of twist for the head. But people sometimes say about this head, it's actually made of concrete, not bronze, but it's very modern because it's like a fragment. It relates obviously to Roman and Greek fragments, but it's also the idea I like to think of the body can't hold after Picasso, Cubism, Einstein, this period before the First World War. The idea that you can do a whole body and that somehow makes sense as a representation of the human, of us, is not sustainable. People have sometimes said you can't tell whether the cheek of this boy is resting comfortably or whether it's sort of burning up. And this idea of being somewhere in between different states is very modern, you know, never resolved, essentially, a very modern condition. Let's move on. I think we're going to look at more things to do with light at Kettle's Yard. Now you can see a little bit more of the room. I should be doing this in a slightly different order. This is Helen's sitting room. So it's immediately up the spiral staircase. Some of you will remember this. Let's keep going. Now, this is very special. You won't have seen this. We should do a postcard. We should do T-shirts. So someone called, oh, I'm forgetting her name. One of our wonderful visitor assistants, Lauren. I like to think Lauren waits. This is the equivalent of Brunel in the Box Tunnel. You know, Brunel, the great engineer, creates a tunnel on the way to Bristol. But only one day of the year or one dawn of the year can you see light through this long tunnel. Incredible. And this is sort of our equivalent. The sort of one day of the year where a rainbow comes through one of the windows at Kettle's Yard and hits Brancusi's Prometheus. And Lauren managed to catch it in a photograph. Isn't that amazing? So it's just very beautiful. I'm assured that this rainbow on the head does not damage the artwork, which is, makes sense, I think. Okay, let's keep going. Next slide. And we can now see the full piano with some lovely daffodils below. So it's a different time of year from now. Helen was really the person who was into playing the piano and had very many musical friends. We still have concerts at Kettle's Yard. Now you're looking down at another piano, which is in the modern extension, the Steinway. And really this slide is to show you that Jimmy was rather into putting important sculptures on pianos. We're all rather used to it, but actually sculptures don't tend to sit on pianos, they tend to sit on plinths or in other ways. And this is by, let's go to the next slide, this is by Noam Garbo. And this is an image from A Way of Life, the book, the rather remarkable sort of opus book that Jimmy wrote in 1984. You can see, so this is a very early use of perspex and nylon. It was made by Noam Garbo, who was a refugee living in St Ives in Cornwall during the Second World War, invited by Ben Nicholson. And this is made of perspex and nylon in 1944, called Construction in Space, #1. We're so pleased to have it. There are 17 that look a little, 17 of the same kind of sculptures. They're all extraordinary. There's one at the Tate, and it sits here and just lets the light catch it. It's a sort of miracle, really, how he actually made it. It's incredibly detailed. Behind it, you can see a Gaudiya Bresco relief, and to the left, a big Ben Nicholson painting that you can also see in photos of their house in Tangier, actually. And here's the piano, which we still play, the Steinway. The rumour is that when the extension opened in May the 5th, 1970, there was a bit of a misunderstanding, and the piano came, this wonderful Steinway, and it was brown. And Jim said, I can't have this. It can't be brown. It has to be black. So the brown piano was taken away and the black piano was brought, and we still have it. We look after it very well. Let's keep going. Next slide. Oh, there we are. We can see it more close up. Amazing. He wanted, these are really like little models. Noam Garbo's whole vision was these would become huge sculptures. And after the war, he was a huge success, moved to America and did make huge sculptures. There's a very famous one in Rotterdam. So what started as little models, eventually he was able to fulfill them as full-scale sculptures. Let's keep going. And we're just going to look at some lights. We're moving towards the end. You're just seeing, as you can see, glimpses of Kettle's Yard. I hope this tempts you back to Cambridge as soon as you can come and see us. This is an amphora that Jimmy picked up in the Sahara Desert, probably for nothing. Lady Scott, who was a great doyenne of the Tangier expat scene, was very horrified that Jim was at all interested in this amphora and said it must have all sorts of nasty things in it. This was not in my view, the exotic object. This was the unexotic object that Jimmy picked up. And he says Lady Scott was horrified. And then he says, it got broken at one point, but I had it mended at the Louvre. So there's something about Jim saying that this very ordinary object deserved to be mended in the Louvre. That's his message. And it sits now on the banister above the spiral staircase, and you can see the light catching it. Let's go to the next slide. And here we are in what we call the dancer room. Gaudiya Bresco, the sculptor I've mentioned, was both avant-garde and also figurative at the same time in these few years before the First World War. And this is a beautiful sculpture of a dancer in 1914. Light pouring in. Let's go to the next slide. Jimmy used to say with a room that the windows are the first pictures in a room. So if you want to furnish a room, you need to empty it entirely and just notice where the light is. And here we're looking at just inside the modern extension. And apparently, I didn't even know this, I should know this being the director, but this wooden sort of table was used for making bread in France, or at least the top was, so I am told. And behind it is a William Congdon painting of two Indian temples. Congdon was another artist Jim met when he was in America in the 1940s. Let's keep going. Really, these are all just to show you how lovely it is with the light. This is in Jimmy's bathroom. And you have a little Gaudiya Bresco door knocker, another William Congdon, you can't really see, but this is a beautiful one. I'd love to take this one home. This is of St. Mark's Square. The Congdons also at one point looked rather unfashionable 1950s, but they have this sort of dark, moody colours. They feel just right, actually, against the whitewashed walls. And then down below, those aren't sculptures, those are just pebbles again. Of course, they look a little bit like Henry Moore sculptures. Let's go to the next slide. And here we are back in the modern extension, and this is what I think of as late Jimmy. So if you made the house in 1957, we're now looking at 1970, May 1970, and what an amazing arrangement. A 14th century Buddha on the left, Gaudiya Bresco drawings, very avant-garde. You can see a sort of extraordinary figure with a sort of modernist cubist dog. You can see 4 Ben Nicholson paintings, 3 of them sort of at the top are 1920s, and the one at the bottom of 1962, Argos, when he's abstract. A museum recently asked to borrow a couple of those Ben Nicholsons, and I just had to say no, to sort of disrupt the whole feel of it. You have a butcher's block below, and really I could look at this for the rest of my life. It's so beautifully arranged in terms of the sort of objects and the sort of aesthetics of it. really very special. I can't explain it. I think it's sort of endless in a way. Jim Eade, of course, is an artist. Let's go to the next slide. Yes, here we are, close up. Jim Eade and Ben Nicholson had a bit of an argument about two pears and a goblet on the left, because I think Jim Eade sort of described them as if they were actually sort of real in some way, or somehow implied it in a letter to Ben. And Ben immediately said, "What do you mean they're real? They're not real. They're images of a goblet." And anyway, they got into a rather silly argument in a way about the notion of reality, but it's quite fun to read it now. Let's go to the next slide. Yes, there it is again, useful. And it's next to this strange garden ornament by Henry Gaudiya Bresco as well. Next slide. Yes, just now, I want you to notice, all of you, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, notice that wee dog on the left. Just keep that in your mind, because you might see another dog a little bit later on. Okay, let's keep going. And now we're looking just beyond that, the end of the modern extension. These are pictures by Valenti, an Italian artist Jim became friends with at the end. And if we keep on going, we're just going to look at this arrangement on this slate here. Wonderful bowl by the great ceramicist Lucy Ree, born in Vienna, but she lived in London from 1938, escaping the Nazis. We're doing an exhibition with Lucy Ree in 2022. It's very exciting. You're the first to hear about it. If you don't know her work, look her up. R-I-E is her second name, Lucy, L-U-C-I-E. Incredible, unbelievable artist in a way, made pots all her life. Jimmy got to know her. Let's keep going. Next one. And now we're looking at some more fishing floats. These used to trail behind the boats in St Ives in Cornwall and other places. And some other bits and pieces here. Let's keep going. Next one. It's rather nice detail. Jimmy called this bowl by Lucy Ree the Wave. Next slide. And I just wanted to show you, occasionally we interrupt, or don't interrupt really, we invite in works by artists we're showing in the gallery. So here's Jennifer Lee, one of the pots, you saw her earlier in Gallery 2. Here's one of her pots put into the house. And they actually did look completely wonderful. I wish she'd left them behind. You can see this tall white pot, gorgeous. Next slide. And now this is just to show you, this is looking down, the extension has sort of double height, and the bricks, each brick actually is almost an artwork. They're sort of hand-fired ceramic bricks. We love them too. But you can see the chairs, and Jimmy really organised all the chairs to be in conversation. And having just studied the Tangier years when they were there, they used to invite very bored soldiers from Gibraltar to come and stay with them in the 1940s after the war. And you realise that Jim and Helen Eade, in a way, their great talent was about people. It was about allowing people to live with art, giving people this extraordinary experience that they had had themselves. They were absolutely friends of artists. They did collect art. They did believe in art, but they really believed in people living with art. That's what really mattered, and people just relaxing with art. Let's go to the next slide. And you can see two more chairs talking to each other. Our wonderful, almost sort of sofa-like, a little bit. If you come to Kettle, you have to sit on the white sofa. It's very difficult to get back up again. It's so comfortable. I just, rather a well-known artist I was with yesterday, Ai Weiwei, who now partly lives in Cambridge. How extraordinary is that? And we're hoping to work with Ai Weiwei. And Ai Weiwei and I have sat on this sofa and had the obligatory photograph, which you can find on my Instagram. Anyway, lots of detail I could talk about in another talk here. Let's keep going. I think we're almost there. And then we'll look at some questions. Now, I can't see it because I've got various screens, but if you look on the right, so this is looking back into Helen's sitting room. You can see the piano again with the Brancusi. You can see the light coming through, the plants, which I haven't even spoken about. And on the right, you can see the little bronze dog, the sort of avant-garde cubist dog by Gaudiya Bresco, waiting to trip somebody up. Because in a way, Kettle is all about making people alert, making people more aware of the world. Jimmy wanted to create a sanctuary. The First World War stayed with him all his life. He lived through 2 world wars. And in a way, Kettle was all about sharpening our sense of who we are and what we can do. It wasn't about escape in the end. It was like good meditation. It's about making you see things more clearly, understand yourself better, and be able to sort of address maybe the issues of your own life, but certainly the issues of the world. So we consider Kettle to be not only an aesthetic pleasure, but a powerful place, and really not a museum, a sort of proposition, a way of thinking, a way of life. Thank you very much. I'm now going to stop I hope that was interesting. And I'm going to look at, if I'm able to, I'm going to look at the questions and read them back to you and try and look at some of those. Thank you. Let's see if I can do that. Ah, right. I've gone to something that says Q&A here, although I suspect I'm meant to be looking at something else. Meant to be looking at my thing, which I can't do. I think I might answer some of the ones I can see now, and then I'll see if I can get to my Q&A page, which I can't at the moment unless I leave. But I'm nervous that if I leave, I'll be saying goodbye to all of you, which would then delay us while I get back and don't say goodbye. So I'm going to look at this. So Keith White has asked, how are display items chosen? Well, they were all chosen by Jim Eade. So this is a permanent display. And although we sometimes have things by contemporary artists and we occasionally lend things, actually they all stay the same. And why wouldn't they? Because it's an extraordinary kind of single artwork. The music concerts are held, I'm asked where the music concerts are held. They're held in the modern part, the 1970 extension. It's a very special place. You're surrounded by art. The first concert was Jackie Dupre and Daniel Barenboim. I mean, we've never quite exceeded this. There's a wonderful letter from Jackie Dupre, who Jimmy knew, saying how wonderful to play at the opening of the new Kettle's Yard, the new extension in 1970, surrounded by art. The acoustics were terrific. And actually we're celebrating 50 years of concerts at Kettle's Yard. We were going to celebrate it this year because it would have been 50 years, 2020. But in a couple of years' time, we've invited Sheku, the great cellist, who was at one of the royal weddings, at Harry and Meghan's wedding, to come and perform. So we'll have another extraordinary cellist to celebrate 50 years of music at Kettle's Yard. Now I'm looking at these ones, and I fear I'm meant to be, as I say, looking at lots of others. But anyway, Amanda Moore, how do you publicise Kettle's Yard to the Cambridge students? I was there and I never heard about it. Oh dear, please come back, Amanda. Come and hear about it. It's always a bit of a struggle. I mean, we have posters everywhere. We have advocates in every college. We do our best. But as everybody knows who's been at Cambridge, it's very intense 8 weeks. And I am a bit sad when I hear people have been at Cambridge for 3 years and somehow didn't make it to Kettle's Yard. So we'll have to keep on trying. After my Tangier experience recently, discovering Jim and Helen Eade in Tangier, I'm determined that we invite our students in even more and that they can relax in the house and in a way not escape, but just sort of be in a different space from whatever the rest of their life is at Cambridge. Now, I'm being asked quite a detailed question here about a small object visible on the first slide, to the left of the fireplace. Let me read. Oh, yes. Okay, so I'm being asked about the object near the Christopher Wood Flowers painting. That, I wonder if any of you noticed it, it's a sort of wooden object. That is in fact a chieftain's headrest from the Cook Islands in the South Atlantic. Quite why Jim had a chieftain's headrest from the Cook Islands in the South Atlantic, I have no idea, but that's what it is. And I'm just reading the rest of this wonderful question. What are the fishing floats made of? They're made of glass. Did Jim Eade study the Japanese concept of wabi-sabi, or did he discover the beauty of objects? I don't think he did know about any Japanese. He was very international in his thinking and very interested in different spiritual, sort of all sorts of different ways of looking at the world, particularly spiritual. But I'd never heard anything around the Japanese particularly. We have some Japanese paper lanterns, but they were bought in Tangier, I think. Any catalogues by Kettle's Yard is less than $80, and on Amazon, yes, all our catalogues are less than $80. I don't know how many are on Amazon. Please go to our own website and help us, please, at this difficult moment. Is Kettle's Yard engaged in collaborations with sorts of other institutions? We are in collaborations with all kinds of people. We're in collaborations with the Baltic and Gateshead in Newcastle, with the Fruit Market Gallery in Edinburgh, with the Whitworth Museum in Manchester. Collaborations are crucial, particularly to get through this difficult time that we're in at the moment. And we have international collaborations as well, of course. Can you say a little about the chamber concert, which I was lucky enough to get a raffle ticket to attend? Chamber concerts, we have about 12 concerts a year. Of course, they're all suspended at the moment, which is very sad. We're hoping to start them again next spring. Absolutely wonderful experiences. Often they're quartets, Shostakovich, Bach, Beethoven, tend to be kind of classic. We also do a new music series. Please come back, please, or come and support us, or look online, because there's lots of wonderful things online. we really feel proud that when we closed in March, we didn't just go silent, we didn't go and sort of hide. We have done masses on the website in a very, I think, warm and special way. So please explore our website. It's called Kettle's Yard website, but Kettle's Yard at home is the thing to look for. What is the cleaning regime of Kettle's Yard? Well, very, very careful. We have a cleaner called Andrew, same name as me, and Andrew is just very careful with a duster. It's every day, and we try and keep things as beautiful and feeling good as possible. I don't. Jimmy did used to sort of scrub the floor himself. I'm afraid I've got other things to do other than scrub floors. Would you be able to say a few words about the plants in Kettle's Yard? I know very little about the plants. I'm very lucky that other people know about the plants, except to say they really mattered to Jim Eade. And we have cuttings. And if you choose to donate some money to Kettle's Yard, we can give you cuttings from the plants. How special is that? But the plants are wonderful. I'm very grateful to the team who do look after them. There's a terrible story of Jim Eade and Helen going on holiday and leaving the house in the care of actually some postgraduate students. And they didn't water the plants, and some of the plants died. And this was a real sort of crime, as you can imagine. Are the visitors truly invited to sit on the furniture? Yes, they absolutely are invited to sit on the furniture. Someone called Carol has asked, does that cause a lot of grief in maintaining it? It causes a lot of grief and a lot of money in maintaining it, but it's so essential. So we are constantly reupholstering all of the furniture and cleaning all of the covers, but it's so special to be able to sit down, and such a rare thing actually. I don't think Kettle's Yard is really like anywhere else, but if it was like anywhere else, most other places you can't sit on the chairs. There's a pine cone or a sign saying please don't sit down. So with us it's please do sit down. That's so important. I'm just checking the time. We're okay, we're whizzing through here. Would you chat a bit about their time in Tangier? How did Jim and Helen decide on that particular place to live? There are two interesting amphorae you pointed out. Were there influences from the region on the collection? Why did they decide on that place to live? Such an interesting question. Jim Eade had a sort of relapse after the First World War when the Tate Gallery, what's now Tate Britain, was flooded from the Thames, and it brought back memories of the trenches. This is in about 1929. And he went to Tangier, prompted by an artist called Teddy Wolfe, to recover. And I think Tangier was a little bit like going to Nice in France. It was just a wonderful climate. Really, the weather was terrific. And so he was there for a few months in 1930. And I just think he loved the sense of it being somewhere else. I think he found London in the mid-30s sort of slightly too much. He'd been very active, involved writing essays, supporting artists, but suddenly the Tate was too much and he just needed to be somewhere else. I mean, he did, for a bit, he was sort of commuting from Tangier to London, and then from London to, then almost from Tangier to America, doing these incredibly energetic lecture tours. Every town and city in America he spoke in. Got wonderful reviews, everyone loved him. Although it's quite rare halfway through a lecture to sort of make an assumption that everybody goes to church on Sundays. You wouldn't really do that now, but in those days you did. But no, Tangier, I think, was through this artist, Edward Wolfe, Teddy Wolfe. And he said, one of the things he said when he got there in 1936, 37, he said, I've never felt so released. So I think there's a sense that it was just had a feeling of freedom. It was what was called an international zone. It didn't belong to any one country. It sort of belonged to France and Spain and kind of a little bit to Britain. I'm afraid it was a kind of colonial setting. I think you have to note that Jim and Helen did live in, they did live in a very establishment colonial setting, which eventually Morocco became independent in 1956. And looking back, it doesn't look so great. Of course, the sense of the colonial and the inequality. But equally, there was a feeling that it was sort of outside of traditional boundaries, and there was a sort of freedom about Tangier, which I think Jim Eade appreciated. There are several wooden chairs. I'm trying to keep up here. There are several wooden chairs throughout the house. What is the style era? One seems to be a rocking chair. Well, please, again, I'm endlessly sending you to the website, but it's not just any old website. There's a whole series at the moment by somebody called Andrew Smith, who's one of our visitor assistants, which is all about the furniture. So you need to read his blogs, his stories about the furniture. There's one rocking chair. There are lots of Windsor chairs, which are those sort of high-backed wooden ones. They're not particularly special. You could go and buy one. But they feel good. and they're sort of comfortable. And I think they make you feel a bit special. And I think Jim Eade was in the business of making you feel special, but thoughtful at the same time. Anthea Bain, I admire Gaudiya Bresco enormously and have models of the little dog and the fish. But what do you think of the film by Ken Russell of Savage Messiah? Well, it's completely mad, the film by Ken Russell. I think it's 1968. Ken Russell, do look him up, was a sort of extraordinary, sort of visionary filmmaker. And he made a film about Jim Eade's book, Savage Messiah, which I mentioned, which is really about the letters between Henry Gaudiya Bresco and his girlfriend, Sophie Bresco. Which was considered very racy because the letters are quite racy. I think Jim Eade managed to edit the letters without noticing, which is quite funny. Anyway, a film was made. Jim Eade has a brief walk-on part. The film is pretty difficult. I mean, it's pretty difficult not to laugh some of the times. It's very kind of gauche. The poster for the film, which is actually on display at Kettle's Yard at the moment as part of our current exhibition by the contemporary artist Linda, has a great huge banner on the poster. It's rather wonderful. It says, "All art is sex." I mean, who are we to disagree? So there are, All Art is Sex, Savage Messiah, from the book by H.S. Eade, Harold Stanley Eade, known as Jim. So it's quite difficult to get hold of the Ken Russell film, but if you can, it's quite intriguing. It's a period piece, I think it's fair to say. Christopher Warman has asked, did Jim Eade create any art himself, apart from his brilliant arrangement of other people's work? Well, he did train as an artist. I didn't say that, at Edinburgh College of Art before the war. That's where he met Helen. He was always rather critical of his parents and sort of put them in a conservative camp, but they let him go to art school. He didn't go to university. In a way, the First World War was his sort of university. He painted. We have a few, I would say, not terribly good paintings of oil paintings of harbours in a sort of impressionist style. But he says that when he discovered Van Gogh, he couldn't be that kind of artist. He couldn't make paintings again once he'd seen Van Gogh and understood Van Gogh. He just thought, I can't do that. I need to be something else. So he didn't carry on making paintings. He was at the Slade School of Arts just after the war in 1919 in London. And we discovered fairly recently a brilliant drawing of Helen by him. Only one drawing, no sketchbooks, no other drawings. Anyway, it's a drawing in early Renaissance style, actually brilliant. I mean, really beautifully done. It's not quite like Botticelli, but it's very, very good drawing. It's owned by Mary, the daughter in Somerset. And it was quite exciting taking it out of its frame and discovering it was actually by Jim Eade. Jonathan Harry, as a student, I remember borrowing some items from Kettle's Yard that were not on display. Do you still do that? Yes. So we have a student loan scheme, and Jim Eade believed really strongly, how do we give students a chance to get used to the idea of not just having rock concert posters on their walls, but having real works of art? And so we carry on that tradition. They're not such valuable works of art as they were then. People did used to be able to borrow Alfred Wallace paintings or even paintings by Ben Nicholson. Now they tend to be sort of framed prints, but they're still good. And we absolutely carry that on, and students take them away. They pay a small fee, but they take them away on their bicycles. And it's a very important sort of principle. And I think that does advertise Kettle's Yard actually to the student community, the fact that if you go into someone's room, you'll see a work of art from Kettle's Yard. So we want to expand that, and actually we're very grateful that a supporter has recently decided to help us to make that scheme even better known and to sort of replenish the works of art within it. Yes, thank you. How can Cambridge alumni further your work on behalf of Kettle's Yard? Well, looking at the time, this is my moment to say that, enthusiastic as I am and wonderful as Kettle's Yard looks, we are in crisis. I mean, it feels as though I accept this, that the theatre and concert world are arguably in more crisis than the museums and galleries world, but let's not be under any illusion. We've been open again a few days a week, weekends, and now Wednesday to Sunday since the 14th of August. We're very proud that we've reopened, but we're opening at a massive loss. The shop is only taking a third, the donations are a third down, the visitors are a third down. So we were getting used to the idea of 250,000 people a year. We're only going to have, I don't know how many, back down to sort of 70 or 80,000. We're looking at a loss. Just to give you an idea, we have a turnover of £2 million at Kettle's Yard. We're looking at losing £400,000 this year, this financial year. So it is a very, very serious worry for me, and indeed, of course, for all of the museums in Cambridge. And so we are really calling on all our supporters, all our donors, become friends, become patrons of Kettle's Yard, buy things from our wonderful online shop. Please help us if you can, because really, This is not easy. The university supports us with about 30% of our costs every year, and we manage to raise the rest normally. But this puts us in a very difficult position. So we need all the help we can get from all of you and from anybody else who thinks that Kettle's Yard is important to the university, important to the world. So there's my advert for supporting us, but please help us if you can. We'd be incredibly appreciative at any level. I'm just going to see what else there is here, and then we're probably going to be told to go and do something else with our lives. Did Jim and Helen keep the house as clear and tidy and as clean as it is now? Are the contemporary photos? They did keep it as clean and tidy, and I think Helen was brilliant at debunking Jim Eade a little bit. You know, if Jim became a bit pompous, a little bit too precious, I think Helen, with her wonderful Scottish accent, would have said, "Oh, come on, Jim, you know, I must be allowed to leave my knitting on the stairs occasionally." But they did keep it pretty tidy. I mean, Jim Eade believed that there was something very soulful about doing the washing up. Well, I mean, we should all be doing the washing up, but doing the washing up, scrubbing floors, just really understanding the material nature of looking after a house. So yes, is the answer to that. How did Jim Eade finance his life? How much finance support does we get from the university? So I've just said we get around £450,000 from the university, but we have to raise another, you know, the other £1.5 million comes from a little bit of endowment from the Friends of Kettle's Yard and from a huge amount of fundraising, all of which I have to say is much of that is under threat right now. So the worry is, I don't think we're not going to collapse. We are two important parts, a jewel in the crown at Cambridge University. But not collapsing is not the same as being able to be ambitious and do wonderful things. We do 3 or 4 major exhibitions a year. If we don't find the money, we'll be only doing sort of 2 exhibitions a year. We'll be reducing our research. We won't be able to market ourselves so well to students. All sorts of things will just be less good. So I hope we won't get to that point. Peter Nisbet, a volunteer student committee member at KY in the 1970s. Thank you very much, Peter. We really appreciate students helping. Eleanor Dobson, how do you think our relationship to an object or work of art changes if we just see them displayed in a more informal, comfortable space? That's so interesting, isn't it? I hope people feel more, very good question, Eleanor. I mean, more sort of connected, more, well, because Kettle's Yard is a sort of, we do talk about it as being a kind of, to some degree, a kind of democratic display. He suggests that you should spend as much time looking at an arrangement of pebbles as looking at a painting by Miro or Ben Nicholson or Christopher Wood. So there's a real argument about value, about what do we value. And so I think it makes you question the idea of what an art object is, potentially, and what matters. And Jimmy was a great champion of artists, but clearly he was a great champion of creativity by anybody. And of course we have works by child artists in the house, his own granddaughter, but also another child artist. We have works by many untrained artists. I think Jimmy believed in the outsider. He was a bit of an outsider himself. Is there a connection between Kettle's Yard and the Peggy Guggenheim? Not really, but they are like cousins. I agree. I love the Peggy Guggenheim collection in Venice. Has a very similar sort of feel. And I would love to find that letter or that photograph that shows that Peggy met Jim. I'm not sure they did, but that would be wonderful. How were the pianos chosen? I don't know. I have no idea. I do know that Bechstein and Steinway are the 2 big piano brands, if we would say today. Can you tell us about the plants? What do you display in the separate galleries? So the criteria for exhibition. So the exhibition program in our new galleries, of course, incredibly important. And I've been talking about the house. And we really try to be, try and choose artists who we feel have a connection to Jim Eade's ethos around the idea of the art and life, really, the interconnectedness between art and life. So we'd be unlikely to show an artist who was so wrapped up in perhaps the conceptual art world or indeed in their own obsessions that somehow it didn't connect to real lives and to real people and sort of the physical and the real space. Peter Webb, wonderful Hokusai exhibition at the BM. Yes, that's lovely. Lovely comment from Anthony Harding. Thank you, about imperfection. Yes, I'm noting that. Thank you. Peter Webb, I recall from 1980, Extension did have a coffee shop. We have a fantastic cafe now. Decision to put a coffee shop where there was a display gallery. No, I don't think we have actually put a coffee shop where there was a display gallery. But our galleries are much better than they used to be, much bigger and much better. I think we're going to have to stop. I'm conscious of time. we're going to get cut off. Or are we still okay? No, I think we need to stop. It's so nice getting all these questions. Please, Keith White, Craig Matchett, Bronwyn, continuing relationship. Yes. Do I have a continuing relationship with Jim Eads' family? I absolutely do. I like to think I'm really like a friend or a cousin to the many Eads and the Swans, who are another part of the family up in Edinburgh. We used to have only about 4 photographs of Jim Ead. We now have about 100 throughout his life. Please do Google him and you'll see a few of them. Look on our website. I feel very proud to be the director of such an extraordinary place and to champion this extraordinary Jim and Helen Ead. And I know there was a question asking about Helen. Helen's bedroom is open to the public, and increasingly, including our current exhibition, we want to say more about Helen Ead. In a way, Jim is very much at the forefront, and she was somebody who sort of supported him and enabled him to do that, but she was a very special person in her own right, and he could never have done anything without her, I don't think. I think I better stop. Thank you. Some people are saying thank you, so I appreciate that too. Please do stay in touch and find us and come and see us. And do take care, and I hope I'll see some of you at some point somewhere in the world. I'm going to stop there. Thank you very much indeed.
And thank you, Andrew, for your insight and unique perspective on the art and objects of Kettle's Yard. This has been a most interesting and delightful talk today. On behalf of Kettle's Yard and Cambridge in America, thank you all for joining us today and for being vital members of our Cambridge community.